Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's session, Fraud Prevention 101, Growing Your Business with Confidence. I'm Simon Huang, Industry Analyst with Tech in Asia, and I will be your moderator for today. So without further ado, let's introduce our panelists for today. First, I would like to welcome Wilfred Halim, SVP, Head of Anti-Fraud, Trust and Security at Lazada. Hi, Wilfred. Good afternoon.
Hi everyone, my name is Wilfred. I've been in this industry for trust and safety for the last 10 years, right? In my early days, I spent a lot of times on search result, making sure the search result integrities and qualities are being upheld. In my last 3 years, I've been working on fraud, especially in the internet industry.
Thank you.
That's quick for me. Yeah.
Thank you, Wilfred, for that. Next, we have Prasanna Kanagasabhai. He is SVP, Identity, Risk, and Fraud at OVO. Hi, Prasanna. How are you today?
Very well. Thank you, Simon. Thank you for having me here.
Thank you.
Like Simon said, my name is Prasanna Kanagasabhai. People call me PK for short. I've been in the space for around 15 to 16 years. I would broadly classify my life into 3 parts. I started with information security, breaking into different stuff. Then I got bored of it and I wanted to build something out. Then I went into engineering to build anti-fraud systems, wherein I worked with a large organization to build up their anti-fraud system. And then I wanted to play the role of business and understanding how fraud works and the behavioral sides of how fraud really works. And I moved into the business side of risk at this point of time.
Thanks for that, Prasanna. Finally, last but not least, we have Brian Kim, Head of BD and Strategy at Grab Defense. Hi, Brian. How are you today?
Hi, I'm doing well. Thank you for having me, and thank you everyone for joining. My name is Brian Kim. I'm a relative kind of newbie compared to Wilfred or PK on this call in the whole fraud space, but I am, as an introduction, I am leading the business development and more on the business side for Grab Defense. Grab Defense, for those who are not familiar, is the proprietary fraud detection and prevention technology that Grab has built and been offering to some of our partners. And I've been looking into how we could build a business to help some of the other organizations in this region to battle against fraudsters and syndicate that we see often, and try to see how we could expedite and accelerate the capability building in this area and help others.
Great, thanks for that, Brian. So let's get started. In recent years, we have witnessed the endless possibilities of the digital world. Because of technology, millions of Southeast Asians are experiencing and reaping the benefits of the boom in digital services, and this has only been accelerated by the pandemic. However, with this growth in digital services, digital fraud is also on the rise. And so how can businesses stay ahead of these fraudsters? Today, we delve into and look at best practices in preventing and combating fraud with a focus on Asia. So I'm going to start off with Prasanna. Prasanna, could you share more about what risk management is and why does it play an important role in the anti-fraud framework?
Thank you, Simon. I think having a very structured thought in anything is very important. Be it looking at fraud or building engineering systems, it's the same principles. If you really think about it from first principles, it's about understanding your customer and what is really a fraud. A fraud is basically something which is not your customer. A behavior which generally is not exhibited by your customer is something which could be a potential fraud. So what you really need to do is build systems which can allow you to collect a lot of data, process a lot of data, and be able to pick the proverbial needle in the haystack. And that's why risk management is important. It allows you to understand and build what is your own understanding of a company is, what is it that I will do and what I will not do. It helps also from a very governance perspective. I work in the financial industry and it's a very regulated space. It's very important that we have to also be coherent that we hold people's money. So essentially fraud systems, I believe, is one of the very cornerstone of a financial industry. We believe and we have to be, the fact is people put money only if there is trust in the system. Otherwise, I put money in the bank that I put because I believe that it is secure. It is more safer than putting under my pillow. It is believed that though interest rates are there and all of those do come in, trust is the most important thing. And that's where the fraud systems are very, very important. It allows you to think from a perspective, and the management process is important because you basically can then start measuring what you are. You can only control what you measure.
Thank you for that, Prasanna. I like how a lot of things, so many things come back at the end of the day to understanding who your customers are and how they will behave. Brian, could you share with us as well, same question, what to you is risk management and why does it play an important role in the anti-fraud framework?
Some of the great things that we also focus a lot about understanding and being able to measure fraud. And and another element that I would like to bring in and share is when we talk about, risk management, it really is essentially about understanding the trade-off, because risk management, especially in the anti-fraud framework, is trying to find the right balance between the risk and reward. In this case, it would be how we could balance the measures to stop fraudsters and some of these closing out the loopholes, and balancing that with the actual incentive we want to give out to our customers to attract new customers or make the customer experience better. So to that extent, risk management and the anti-fraud is about really balancing these two out and make sure not only we are here to understand fraud and minimize fraud, but also understand how we could maximize the overall return and really help the businesses grow at the pace they have the potential to. So having this clear view of trade-off and risk management capabilities become very important for anti-fraud, because it's not only about how you minimize your fraud losses or your costs, but it's really about how anti-fraud could be a competitive advantage. As PK mentioned, like people will not put their money in a system that they don't trust. So building a trust using these anti-fraud framework and tools becomes a very essential part of not only to reduce the cost or minimize your loss, but really to use these capabilities as a competitive advantage.
Right. Thanks, Brian. So anti-fraud can have a direct impact on your top line, basically, as an organization. Now, Wilfred, let's move to you, and you're with Lazada. With the changing e-commerce landscape where so many more purchases and payments have moved online, how has Lazada prepared itself to tackle fraud?
Okay, I think I'll break into 2 points, right? My approach, as more transactions move to e-commerce, is one is I need to educate the company about fraud, right? While fraud is actually the core responsibilities of the anti-fraud teams or the trust and safety team, the risk management is actually the responsibilities of the company, right? In Alibaba, we believe that the ultimate owners of fraud is not actually the head fraud, but it's actually the head of that business functions, right? In this case, in the larger pictures, then it will be the CEO, right? So that's why in Lazada, we believe that we need to educate everyone, including the commercials or everyone that actually develop a new business models, right? Whenever someone's trying to make a change or develop a new business model or experience, it might actually introduce a loophole and make it easier for bad actors to commit fraud. So we need to educate people to actually think about that while they are designing a new business models, right? One things that I have seen constantly across my times in fraud is people always try to combine selling digital goods with cash on delivery. Yeah, it sounds cool, but it's also introduced like a lot of loopholes. Right, so I think that's why you need to educate the companies. I think second is we need to upgrade our risk of fraud technology. We need to upgrade our policies and mechanisms, right? This battles against fraud is continuous and long term, right? While you sleep, they continue to innovate. We only work like 5 days in a week. They probably work 7 times 24, right? So they continues to try to up the battles against you. So in Lazada, we believe in improving our risk technology so that we can deliver a real-time decision at scale, right? There are more and more people coming to e-commerce, purchasing things. We don't want our risk engine or risk solutions to be a a transaction blockers, like when someone need to purchase something and then your risk engine actually need 5 seconds to decide, oh, allow or disallow. So we don't want that to happen. We need the risk engine to be updated so that they can deliver real-time decision at scale, right? We also moving from a rule-based approach. We still use a lot of rule-based approach, but we are using more and more machine learning solutions. Why? Because rules are temporary and it can get overly complex. And once it get overly complex, it starts to produce a lot of false positive, which is bad for your company, for your business, right? So we are using more and more machine learning solutions, so that we can detect new threat and do a fast follow-up. At the same time, we are depending on this so that we can provide a more granular response to the risk that we face. Right? Not everyone should be rejected. Maybe someone just need to be, ask them to give you an answer, what is 1 + 1, right? Someone just need to prove that they are human, but not necessarily need to be rejected. So I think that's how we approach all the shift into e-commerce online now. Yeah.
Great, thank you, Wilfred. And I'd just like to remind the audience that we will have time for audience Q&A at the end of this session. So if you have any questions for any of our panelists, you can actually just use the tab at the bottom of your screen, and please feel free to ask any questions that you have. So our next question is for Brian. Based on your observations and the data that you have seen, are businesses acknowledging the importance of risk management and practicing that as part of fraud prevention?
Talk to some of our potential customers for grab defense and try to understand where they are on their anti-fraud journey. We see a lot of organizations really just starting to build out and starting to build the capabilities. I think fraud specialist type of capabilities are kind of another very common skill set that we see. But I think a lot of companies are trying to build that out at the moment. But at the current stage, I think what I have seen a lot is a lot of people just focusing on minimizing the fraud losses that they see and more visible. For example, like how do they reduce chargebacks is one of their top in the agenda, which is a good starting point, I think. But I think what often overlooked is, in most cases, is, as mentioned, how fraud prevention and the whole risk management needs to be taken into account, different factors and different trade-offs. So the type of questions that needs to be answered, in my view, are not only about blocking those how do we identify and some of these potential fraudulent transactions, which is very evolving in nature. So we see a lot of these fraudsters evolving. So it really comes down to how do you understand the how do you gather ground intelligence? How do you understand the evolving nature of syndicates? How do you try to catch up with the evolving nature and new technique that is coming up, so that understand what type of capabilities you need to stop them. But more importantly, it also comes down to while you want to be able to stop all these potential fraudulent traffic, how do you actually provide a better customer experience for those who are identified as high quality traffic with less friction? And how do you not only minimize your potential fraud losses or promotional losses, but how do you maximize your marketing ROI by reducing promotion abuse? And how do you also, as Wilfred mentioned, there's a lot of rules or AI algorithm engines that goes in, but it also even if you use a rule, it has to be dynamically adjusted so that your fraud policies should be able to be dynamically adjusted, and your risk threshold should also change to meet various and changing business objectives. So I think taking that next step and being able to really step into to answer some of these questions are potentially the next stage of where I would imagine and where I expect a lot of these risk management practice will evolve into. But I think overall, what I have seen so far is still a little bit at the early days of it.
Great, thanks for sharing, Brian. And we can move on to the next part, where we're going to talk about at the stage at which businesses should start planning for fraud detection and prevention. And I'm going to start off with Wilfred. Wilfred, at which stage in a business should the business start to plan for fraud detection and prevention?
Okay, so for me, I'm gonna give like a bit conflicting answers, but yeah, let's try. So personally, I think the earlier the anti-fraud or trust and safety teams in your company get involved in your business development, the better, right? Because hardly anyone in your commercial or business team would think about fraud, like let alone the worst case scenarios. So that typically why we exist, like why all these anti-fraud people exist, because nobody thinks about worst case scenario. So at the same times, I think fraud detection and prevention should not be used to limit business innovations, right? Should not be used to limit your business growth. So for company that is really at the initial growth stage, where you just launch your product to test the waters, I personally, again, think that a complex fraud mechanism might be too early, right? You don't want to, stop trying this, stop trying that, just because you think of the worst case all the time. So what I believe is, while the protections of victims might not need to be in place from the start, you should at least have the tracking and monitorings, right? So you can perform a fast follow-up once things happen, or you can actually look at the data and then decide what to do next. So, and then once the company has completed or launched the first stage or POCs or their trials and ready to scale in terms of traffic, volume, or launching into new countries or new locations, I think that's when your fraud protection should really be in place, right? When the size is small, you can still afford to play around with that. But when your size is huge, the size of the fraud loss that you may experience also grow exponentially.
Right. Thanks for that. I guess it's quite difficult for a lot of businesses to find that sweet spot, right, at which they actually need to start implementing these procedures. Fasana, I'm wondering if you have any views on this.
I just wanted to add to a little bit of what Wilfred spoke about, and I totally agree with Wilfred on that point, wherein anti-fraud at the start, if applied too much, can become a hindrance to business. What, in my personal thought and has worked always, is when you're starting, use this opportunity to collect a lot of data. If you're able to pick information, collect data back in your backend systems, you at least have data to take an informed decision. Be it model tomorrow, or be it even the rule that we spoke about. Like some of the points that came both from Brian and Wilfred was the fact that rules are very tough, and I totally agree. Personally, I believe that rules are like compounds. If we build a compound, people will find a way to go above and beyond it or below it. So you really need to. So the protection is just at one layer. You can't afford to do that with anti-fraud. You need to be flexible. You need to be thinking. So someone who's starting, I would really think that, start at least collecting data, build something that would allow you to see what kind of devices are on your environment, figure out whether you can be able to, what is the quantum of people who are using a rooted device or a new, there is a platform called Mages, which people use to have, do a lot of things. Figure out how many people are doing and using these things. There are a lot of SDKs available. There are some very good tools available in the market. Use these, plug them into your application, start collecting data, see what's happening with your environment first. Then take good decisions like what Wilfred talked about.
Thank you for that, Fasana. Let's move on to Brian. Now, Brian, can you take us through your journey in establishing a successful anti-fraud strategy to stay ahead of fraudsters at all times?
Yeah, I think what PK just mentioned resonates a lot about collecting data and being able to identify, what are the potential threats, and that was actually how the whole Grab defense journey started. But just to give kind of the overall story, at the beginning, obviously, as Grab was growing, we actually started out from relying on some of the other enterprise risk management vendors to protect the platform. These guys, generally came from Europe or US, which is more advanced in this domain. But as we grew, as we collected more data, as we got more visibility, what we continue to realize that a lot of these vendors who does not have a lot of established presence in this region was not able to really provide us with accurate results or sufficient detection capabilities that we felt we needed. And I think that really came from like a lot of these detections really rely on the amount of data you have, the amount of data you're able to analyze using your AI ML algorithms to detect potential fraudulent traffic. And there was just not the level of understanding enough in this region to build a tool at the time when we were actually facing all these growing pains. So that's why, from Grab point of view, we decided to build a system that was able to really accommodate to our need, really able to train and learn from the data we collected, understand what type of device is being used, what type of device is being connected, what are the potential, risk associated with any device. As PK mentioned, is whether someone is using Magisk or other tools to actually, exploit the system, and also, take into corporation all the learnings we had as operating one of the largest, consumer platforms in the region. Not only we have all the data, but also we have a lot of ground intelligence about what is actually happening at the ground level. What are the actual, fraudsters doing? What are the syndicates actually doing? To the extent that all of those, offline knowledge is also embedded into how we approach building our own internal system and, our own anti-fraud strategy. So I think, we came a long way. We obviously, reduced our chargeback by almost 20x and maintaining promo abuse at a, minuscule level. And with that, we also, and with all the investment and innovation we were able to drive, that has been kind of the how we started to build and really launch Grab Defense as our own fraud solution product that really takes into account all these learnings, and hopefully we could expedite some of the growing pains a lot of the businesses will go through.
Right. Thanks, Brian. If I could just ask a follow-up on that, how should businesses actually measure the success of their fraud prevention initiatives? Are there any particular metrics that they should be looking at?
Yeah, I think that's obviously a very tough topic. I think if you ask anyone, it could be a topic on its own, but I think this is a very challenging for any organization, and due to the fact that it's very difficult to measure the exact fraud baseline. Like by definition, if a fraudster is successful, you won't know about it, and thus it's really difficult to understand how much of the fraud is happening, and then how much of that is being captured, and how much of that you're addressing. So, obviously, we have invested significantly into understanding all these factors and trying to establish a fraud baseline, and that really gives you a good starting point to measure how much you are able to detect and prevent, right? So, early on, I think PK also mentioned a lot about understanding the amount of fraud happening, and that is really where it starts. But also, I mean, I think after that, after you establish such baseline, where we are trying to focused on a lot and try to build a lot of knowledge is, understanding not only the direct cost of fraud, but overall, like, what are the other indirect costs as well, right? Not just the losses from fraud, but also what is the cost of us running a fraud prevention tool, and what's the cost of user friction that we're creating through different risk mechanisms. So we also look into all of these different opportunity costs to actually come to a very concrete measure. As I mentioned, going back to how anti-fraud is really about risk management, to understand what are not only the cost aspect, but how we are also maybe potentially impacting the top line as well, so that we can measure the actual success of a fraud prevention at a more holistic level, including the trade-off.
Right. Thanks for that. Fasana, I'm wondering if you have anything to add to this.
I think the important is the fact that if you do not measure it, it doesn't get acted upon. So the reality is, like Brian said, it's very individualistic to an organization to organization. I'm sure Wilfred has different metrics. I have very different metrics, but it's important that we measure these things out. Like, I can give you an example. One of the simple things I think someone had talked about was the fact that marketing spend, that could be one of the things that you really look at. The whole idea of an anti-fraud is to see whether we are adding value to the customer itself. How much of a marketing spend went to the right customer? how much delivered value. Delivered value could be different ways. You should have systems to check back that, hey, did we give a voucher? Did it come back to us? Did we see what happened? What was the purchase done on that case? Or in my case, we do cashbacks. We need to see whether the cashbacks are going to the right people, how much of our TPV is increasing. These are different metrics. But the most important, I'm sure every organization to be very successful in anti-fraud is to early on start getting metrics and start measuring them.
Right. Okay, thank you for that, Prasanna. Wilfred, on this point, do you have anything that you'd like to add?
No, not at this point. I think PK and Brian talk a lot about the metrics already. I think last but not least, if you don't know what you don't know, so if you never measure, then it's hard to justify the existence of your anti-fraud team as well. So you need to start measuring, and then you start to justify the existence and the value add that your team brings to the company.
Okay, thank you. So now that we have a better understanding of the importance of risk management in fraud detection and prevention, I want to move to the topic of AI and machine learning. And this is something that our panelists have already mentioned, previously, but let's focus on this area. And Prasanna, if I can start with you, especially in your industry, in the digital payments services space, there are a lot of fraudsters trying to find every loophole they can. And so how do you level up your anti-fraud framework to ensure clients are protected? And then, after that, are there any AI machine learning techniques involved in that process?
Okay, so let's take this one step at a time. I think Wilfred, when he talked about it, the fact that you need to bring in artificial intelligence is the most important step in anti-fraud today. A lot of data is repetitive. Sometimes it is not humanly possible to watch every transaction and start seeing if they're out of your scope. These are some things that maybe someone is doing a transaction. Like, I'll give you some examples. We use AML to find out where different things are happening. Like if you look at it from a transaction point of view, it looks like a normal benign transaction, but AML or with the AI model that has been built specifically to detect AML and fraud techniques starts looking at to see what is the difference. You keep giving it so much data to see this specific device had logged in with different times. It had different operating system changes or different models, different information to figure out that this is an outlier here. And that allows us to figure out that, hey, we should start concentrating on this user and then build upon a model to figure out what's happening. Now, on the point of what specifics, I can't go much into it because those are operational activities. So I will not go too much into it. I'll give you one example though. A very simple example is when people register, people use email addresses. So much could be taken from just having an email address. Some of the basic things are to like, hey, is this coming from an email address which we cannot follow back? Or whether these are spam email addresses. Have they just created this email address to basically spam your cashbacks and create fake accounts? You could read and figure out and remove a lot of fraudsters just by looking at your email addresses. If all your email addresses have one fixed value and a changed value, where they're scripting this whole thing. An AI model today looks at that and tells us that, hey, this person is registering now. His email address seems to be bad. And then we've created a score. We obviously look at it from a score and say that if this is a bad score, we don't even allow that registration to happen itself. That's one of the examples that I can talk about.
All right, great. Thank you, Prasanna. Brian, over to you. How about, on your end, is there anything else you would like to share about how AI and machine learning can actually help with fraud detection?
Yep. I think, as both PK and Wilfred mentioned, as we try to do fraud detection prevention at scale, like simply relying on simple rules or different method does not really work to be able to detect things efficiently. Obviously, as you move on to scale, we have developed various different supervised or unsupervised learning than AI/ML models that we're applying for fraud detection. And I think one of the benefits that we have been able to do is the AI/ML capabilities are really just only as good as the data it could use. And Grab had the benefit of using a whole lot of data. We processed 40 terabytes of data from over 20 million devices in this area alone. And we have the experience of processing and screening billions of transactions on the platform, which gives us a very good understanding and good, training ground to build all these anti-fraud detections and preventions, and also be tools and AI/ML capabilities that we're actively using and have been tremendously helpful for us. I think one of the, advanced way of we have been using this as well is that we also deploy deep learning models. For example, we have developed a graph neural network, a huge transaction graph for fraud detection as well as anti-money laundering. And we're also building event and sequential neural networks to capture the behavior patterns of the users so that we can identify some of these abnormal behaviors on our platform that we could investigate for potential fraud. And also computer vision technology, for example, are being used for verification of user identity. That could also give us an additional layer for a high risk transaction as well. So, obviously as the syndicates and the fraudsters also continue to advance and evolve in a manner that continues to the fraud is basically continues to be a cat and mouse game, and having a great AI/ML capability really helps you stay ahead of the curve and be able to stop them before it happens.
Great, thanks for that, Brian. And Wilfred, I'm wondering if you have anything else that you'd like to share about the use of AI and ML in Lazada and the e-commerce industry specifically?
Yeah, I think there's a question in Q&A that maybe I can address at the same time as well, because there was a question that asked about how do we use AI, and what are the steps we take to increase the AI explainability, right? How do we increase transparency into AI when we detect fraud? So I think as we go into 6 different countries for e-commerce platform like Lazada, AI is crucial, right? We cannot, create 6 different rules for 6 different countries at the same time for 6 different, I don't know, God knows how many different events and touch points that the customer or seller has in our platform. So I think that's why we really need the power of machine learning to look after all the data that we have and put that into an action, to an enforcement. And also as we build the machine learning models, as we build AI, we not only use that to, we don't use a one-way communication loops. We talk to our users, we talk to our customer, we talk to our sellers, we talk to our frontline colleagues, right? Like our customer care teams, to understand that, hey, what do you see on the ground, right? What are the things that you see on the ground that might not be explainable by the data? So that is some of the additional insight and informations that we bring back while we actually develop our machine learning models, right? So that we don't get into a situations where your models is actually a black box, even to your anti-fraud teams. You don't really know what caused these models to actually flag something. So you bring that human in the loop for all the developments of this model, so that the bias and the explainabilities of the AI model can be addressed. I think probably just that's all.
Great. Okay, thanks for sharing. So a reminder to our audience, we will be concluding the first part of this discussion soon. So if you have any questions, please feel free to post them in the Q&A at the bottom of your screen. We already do have quite a number of questions, so we'll try our best to get through as many of them. So to wrap things up for this stage, we have actually learned the technical and best practices in fraud prevention, and we've heard about some successes and challenges in establishing a strategy to combat fraud. Can each of you, starting with Wilfred, share one key deciding factor when choosing an anti-fraud solution, tool, or partner to protect your business? So Wilfred, let's start with you.
Okay, so I think for me, one of the key qualities that I will look at is actually the experience of the partners against the fraud that you are facing. Does your partners actually work against the type of fraud that you are facing in your company, in your industry. Right? There's a lot of vendors out there that are good at different aspects, and you might need to actually work with different vendors at different touch points. And that's okay, right? You want that's also one of the reasons why you actually not build in-house, but actually approach vendors, because you can actually get you can get the expertise from different vendors at different areas to tackle different fraud. So for me, is always looking at what are the fraud that you want to solve, and whether that particular vendors or potential solution, potential partners has experience to fight against that. Yeah.
Great, thanks for that.
And also, maybe let me add one more thing. It's not just the fraud type, okay, but also experience in the, I would say, the geolocation, the geography, right? The fraud that you see here, let's say a return fraud in e-commerce, the one that you see in Southeast Asia and the one that you see in US will be very different. So does your vendors actually has experience in where you operate? Yeah.
Great, thanks for sharing. Prasanna, maybe we can move to you. What's one key deciding factor when choosing an anti-fraud solution tool or partner to protect your business?
Thank you. That's a very good question. So if you look at it from our perspective, and I go with what Wilfred also said, we have to understand what is it that we are very good at and what is it that we need help with. And like, I'll give you an example. An anti-fraud in a financial industry could be broken into two parts. One is, and predominantly from where I work, it's a very mobile-driven industry. We're a wallet provider, so we're very mobile. So we need a lot of mobile-specific security solutions. But one of the things that we decided to keep in-house and build internally is also about how our business process flows go with. That's something that we know about. So we build systems to understand what, like I'll give you an example to say that if fund movement is happening one place to another, it always talks to a fraud system to ask, can we allow this front system to go forward or not? This is a very intrinsic product internally to us. So we keep that product with us. But what we really believe is we want to go and find out that I spoke about things like Magisk, which is essentially some things which affect our mobile environment. We go then partner with good solutions, like what Wilfred said, find out solutions which are specific to the geography that we are sitting in, and find solutions which will cater to that. And we've taken that up, clubbed them with our systems. Sometimes the most important to also realize is that actually goes with one of the questions asked on security, and I'll answer that question a little bit, is also about how do you bring systems together? It's not just about bringing systems, then you become into an island. How do you bring systems together? How do you collate those two informations together to take correct decisions? So if you just go with a partner, just bring a product in and it does not work with any of your systems, it does not add value to you at all. So you really need to think through from that point. This is how the information is going to come to us. This is how we're going to process it. Someone asked a very interesting question which said that, how do you look at security? And because I did a large chunk of my life in information security, a very good point Lisa has raised, the fact that today anti-fraud systems and security do not talk to each other should change. In our organization, we talk, though security is not a domain that I directly control, and rightfully it should be. We should have two different power centers to build things together. But I also depend on our InfoSec teams to help us tell us that, hey, have you checked all of these to say that whether the tech problems have been sorted out? The reality is collaboration. An organization is best successful when everybody talks to each other. And InfoSec is also a very important partner within the anti-fraud also.
Great, thank you for that, Prasanna. And I think everyone is waiting to go into the questions. So just to wrap up the first part of the panel, Brian, do you have anything to share about a key deciding factor when choosing an anti-fraud solution tool or partner?
Brought up great points. Having experience solving the fraud a lot of people are facing, especially with the regional understanding, I think all makes sense. If I just add a bit more onto that, I think it's important to partner and find the solutions that really share the same problem and have invested interest in solving that. And that's because, fraud is actually a very good business for fraudsters, right? And we see, fraudsters will always be there when they're wherever the money is, and they continue to evolve. And, having a partner who will face the same issue and continuously invest into understanding what fraud is happening. And as Wilfred mentioned, like fraud differs in the type by region. So understanding the regional nuances, having the capability to collect all these different data and be able to use that knowledge and expertise to be a partner for you to actually be able to success, not just being someone who will drop you a piece of software and let you figure it out, but someone who could really not only share you the piece of software that helps you detect, but also helps you build a solution for the problem. I mean, I think technical tools are just one part of the solution. There is the overall operational aspect, the integration aspect, and how you mobilize that into a more seamless manner. All matters in anti-fraud solutions. So someone who could guide you on that process, have the knowledge and expertise and experience doing the same thing, and being able to continuously understand, gather new insight would be something that would definitely helps a lot of the organizations in accelerating their capability building and plunge through the battle against fraud.
Great, thank you for sharing, Brian. Okay, we're going to move to try and answer some of your Q&A questions. So I'll start with the first, one of the first ones that I see, and that's how can businesses encourage everyone in the organization to play a part in building a successful anti-fraud strategy? Prasanna, did you want to take a stab at this?
Actually, Wilfred spoke about it when we started the conversation. He talked about the fact that people should understand that anything that they build can impact fraud itself. And like we internally have a process wherein any new feature has to be signed off by multiple stakeholders, including for anti-fraud, which essentially means that we have a quick check. We are not going to stop anyone from doing anything, but maybe sometimes it's about at a design state, you just have a chat whether this will work, what will be the practical problems. The best part is, the reason you want to have this chat is anti-fraud people are also people who have worn those hats. They understand the problem. So they could look at it from the problem in a very different angle. Developers are looking at it from a very good angle of how to be productive and look at the right one. But the anti-fraud team comes and says, have you thought about this? And this is something that could go wrong. And you could quickly take a decision whether to change something or add a control to it to ensure that you build better.
And let me also chime in. I think, one of the things that both PK, Wilfred, myself have been emphasizing is that being able to measure things properly and understand what's happening. And I'll give you an example why this is important for the organization. I think a lot of organizations make the mistake of just treating fraud as a cost element or a way to minimize cost. But if you think about it, as an example, if you are running a marketing or promotion, and in some cases we see this happen, and it could be the case where 10% of your whole fraud or promotional cost is being lost due to fraud. And what I think needs to be realized is this is not just a fraud loss or cost. It actually means when you spend 100 on your customer acquisition, you're only utilizing 90. So that basically means your customer acquisition cost is 10% higher than it should be, right? So it really affects your overall ROI on your promotions. It hampers your growth potential, and being able to manage that fraud into a low level basically will give you a 10% increase on your customer acquisition, 10% decrease on your customer acquisition cost, which is actually a very big thing if you think about how a lot of the startups or the digital companies here are growing via these aggressive promotions. So having these exact measurements and being able to understand how that is impacting your business, is really fundamental on how you could align everyone in your organization to fight the battle together.
Great, thanks for that, Brian. And I'm going to go to one of the questions that was posted in the main chat group. And this is from someone who says that he's a tech newbie. And he asked, what are the key technology and skills utilized in the industry to address fraud issues? Anyone wants to take a stab at that?
Yeah, let me take a stab, and others could chime in. But obviously, we talked a lot about AI ML, and I think that is obviously what everyone talks about and very critical in terms of being able to execute fraud management at scale. It helps you not only identify who are the potential fraud or what type of behavior or potential high risk, but also helps you to very quickly understand what are the right measure or what are the right intervention to take action, right? So I think AI ML is a very fundamental capability. Another element is that in this region, especially, we see a lot of leapfrogging where people bypass web stage and go directly into mobile, and people obviously are growingly using their mobile phone more than the internet or their laptops, for example. So having the capability to understand what type of device or the mobile device is being connected to your platform, what type of risk is associated to that, what type of potential hacking tools are being used, or and understanding the risk characteristics is something that will be very critical as a starting point to understand the fraud risk level and potentially detecting fraudsters trying to manipulate the system.
Great, thank you, Brian.
Let me just add a little bit to that.
Yes,
I think one of the other points to also add is to think from a perspective that anti-fraud teams also have to have a very depth thought process. Like, I'll give you an example. One of the things is, as you do promotions, a lot of organizations know that you take a device ID and decide to give promotions to a specific device so that you're able to finally find out who's the real consumer and you give the value to them. But the fact is, Android 10 made a lot of changes. The simple thing could be that the MAC addresses changes at every step that a new Wi-Fi connection happens, which means that if you used your MAC address as one of your parameters to create a device ID, it goes to moot. So an anti-fraud team members are also supposed to be very technical at that, to understand the fact that how changes are happening, and how will these change impact the business itself.
Okay. Great, thank you, Prasanna. And I have a question here. Maybe, Wilfred, if you want to see if you can answer this. And it says, when is the outsourcing of anti-fraud systems recommended? And at what point do you start building it in-house? Do you have any response to this question?
I think my quick answers is when the company is still at the growing stage, where your focus is all about business and growth, I think it makes more sense to actually try to work with the partners that can help you scale really fast and protect you while you're growing. But once you are able to achieve a certain degrees of growth, you have more stabilities in terms of your business and commercial, it might make more sense in the long term to start building it in-house and start moving those capabilities and build those capabilities in your own company. That way you are able to customize a lot more. And once you get into certain types of, once you get into some degree of scale, like how big your company is, there's also a degree of confidentialities on your business. And that's when you actually want to start, considering building things in-house as well, I would say.
Great. Thank you, Wilfred. Prasanna and Brian, anything to add to this question?
Not much to it. I totally agree with what Wilfred said.
Okay. So maybe we can then go on to question that was posed. Question for Wilfred. What is your most memorable experience in dealing with a sophisticated fraudster in the e-commerce space?
What is the most
memorable experience? Yeah,
I think okay, so maybe not in e-commerce, but it's just throughout my entire experience in trust and safety, right? I think one of the most memorable experience is not actually how big the fraud is or how much loss I experienced or how I actually put a solution to solve it, but most memorable experience is when I actually went to the ground to actually observe how fraud happens, right? We actually went to the ground to, based on our data, we say, hey, it seems like this cities has a lot of funny activities. So let's go to that cities. And then once we go into that cities, and then it's true, right? We went and observed and tried to see, oh, this cities seems to produce a lot of GMV for us. Let's go check whether the GMV is real or not. But when you arrive in that city, in that particular hotspot, all you saw was ghosts. There wasn't anyone there, right? There wasn't anyone there. It was all robot, or I don't know what, but basically it's fraud, right? And that for me is the most memorable experience, because that's when I really proved to myself that fraud exists and they really try to cheat you really badly. And this kind of experience, this kind of first-hand experience is also a very powerful way to bring a top-level executive in your company to go and see the fraud. Once they see the fraud, then they will realize, oh shit, this is true. This is not just a piece of data, right? People are actually playing with my money. So that's, for me, that's really my most memorable experience in the fraud industry. Yeah.
Great, thanks for sharing, Wilfred.
Yeah, just to add to that, I think I also share the same experience with Wilfred. So at Grab, we have a team that specializes in understanding what we call ground intelligence and visiting the fraudster, understanding what's happening. And I also had a chance to go with them. And it's just, when we talk about fraud, I think a lot of people don't understand or underestimate that fraud is actually a business to the people we're trying to defend our platform against. It's not about the this guy who's trying to get one more coupon or one more promotion, whatnot. It's really about trying to defend the platform who are trying to manipulate at scale and run a business out of that. And we'll go into the ground and seeing the operation. It really opens your eyes about the existence of and prevalence, in fact, of such operations that really gives you a better understanding of the degree that is happening and really gets you to think about how potentially you are underestimating the impact of fraud that could have on your platform.
Let me add to that. From a very tech perspective, from my and the reality is, I think every one of us as anti-fraud has to go to the ground to understand what really happens. The beauty of it is when I see how people modify applications, how they write mod applications to modify applications. My understanding of Android went through the roof just by learning how these people broke applications. It's a very good teaching experience. And then you quickly go back and see what do you then go build to ensure you fix these things immediately.
Thank you for sharing, everyone. Okay, we do have a question about metrics, which we have been discussing. And so someone says that the problem they encounter with some of these fraud metrics is that the harder the fraud team works, the worse the metrics look. And so if they never catch the fraud, then they never know that there's such a loss, right? And the metrics look good. So the question is, how do you set fraud metrics to overcome this?
Let me attempt. I think it's not just a problems of metrics, right? I think maybe the way you solve the fraud is not complete enough. If you only detect fraud, that's why you got stuck in this kind of situations where the more you detect, the higher your fraud loss is, right? But the key is how you prevent, right? Once you detect, how do you evolve from detection to preventions? Once you are able to prevent either through a product features or tech, or actually changing your business models or policy, that's when the same metrics will actually shows a lot of improvements in terms of your fraud loss. That's when you go back to your exec and say that, hey, we managed to stop the loss from this type of fraud by X percentage, right? So I think that's one of the key, right? While you build the metrics and while you actually invest in anti-fraud. And secondly, I think my personal experience as well, the method that you use to measure, maybe it's wise to actually have different formula versus of the method that you use to detect the fraud, so that your measurement and your detections are not tracking the same thing. You can see the gap, and that's where your detections will also learn to improve.
Great. Okay, thank you for
And
sharing.
let me add to that a little bit.
Sure.
You also need to be very clear that, you know, the fact, I'm totally on Wilfred's points, but also understand that we are also humans, that the fact that we might be missing something. The reality is fraud is never zero. We might be not catching them at this point of time. So you should always be looking what could be the possibilities, where is it happening, which is what an anti-fraud team should be really looking at. If everything seems to be fine, then there's a problem. Either your detection has got older and you're not getting enough data, and that's where maybe sometimes the ground teams are really helpful. You know, you need to get that data to say, hey, there's something happening, which you start looking at different other ways of finding what's really happening, and then you start taking quick decisions.
Right. Okay. Thank you, Prasanna. Perhaps just since we are at the time, if I could just bring up one more question, and someone has asked, everyone mentions that different geographies are different, you know, the experiences. How are different geographies different? Does it relate to the data, or does it relate to the way the fraud is actually carried out? What are the nuances, I guess, especially in Asia?
I'll go on that first. I'm sure everybody has some very unique perspectives to add on this. Now, I right now work on one country company, and before this, I've worked in companies where we've had presence in multiple countries. I could really see from how much of an expertise in a technology expertise that each one of these fraudsters have. You know, certain countries just buy the product from fraudsters from different countries and they just use it. Some guys go really understand, then they really break it at from a very interesting perspective. So sometimes I wouldn't name which country is what, but the whole idea is to see that it is about how sometimes knowledge is useful and how economic statuses affect the people. That fraudsters are also looking at the situation where it's a business, so they want to be in the business to figure out how quickly they can make money out of it. So sometimes the different countries, the frauds are different, so you need to think differently at different points there.
Great. Thank you, Prasanna. And that's all we have time for today, but I would just like to, you know, ask our panelists if they have anything, you know, they would like to share before we bring the session to a close. So maybe I'll start with Wilfred. Is there anything that you would like to say before we end this session?
Nothing specifically, I'll say. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you, Wilfred. He's been answering, I think, some of the questions as well on his own. Prasanna, any final thoughts that you have that you'd like to share with the audience before we end the session?
I think everybody shared a lot of interesting thoughts. Anti-fraud is a mix of all of these things together.
Right. Thank you. Brian.
Yeah, I think, you know, obviously we shared, you know, PK and Wilfred shared a lot. I think anti-fraud and, you know, building tools against fraud is a long journey. There's a lot of capability building that goes in. I think for Grab, we have invested significantly throughout the journey and went through the growing pains. And I think Grab Defense is really the outcome of that we're able to put together a solution that really helped address our own issues and helped us battle against fraud. And I think the goal we're trying to do is that now that Grab Defense, we made a solution that is available to external business, and we're looking forward to having the opportunity to partner with some of the organizations to help accelerate this journey and be able to help them build the capabilities and protect their own platform so that they could really focus on what's important, whether they want to grow fast or, you know, provide a better customer experience. So looking forward to talking to more people about that.
Great, thank you, Brian. So on that note, we're gonna bring this to an end, and I'd like to thank each of the panelists for taking time out of your schedules to speak with us today, and like to thank the audience members as well. Thank you for tuning in and for asking, you know, all your questions, and look forward to having more conversations in this area with everyone. So on that note, thank you all.